Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 9 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, day 9 of Canto 3, and we are in chapter 4, and we are continuing on today in chapter 4 from verse 17. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, let us chant our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Niravishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Chadesha Tarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakapatarubhyas cha kripa sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay, so day 9 on the 3rd canto, chapter 4, and let's begin with verse 17, and it's Uddhava addressing Lord Krishna after the great battle at Prabhas, where the Yadu dynasty, at least so many of the men who had previously been demigods and like that, where they were all killed. Okay, so verse 17. Oh, my Lord, your eternal self is never divided by the influence of time, and there is no limitation to your perfect knowledge. Thus you were sufficiently able to consult with yourself, yet you called upon me for consultation, as if bewildered, although you are never bewildered, and this act of yours bewilders me. Well, yeah, that's really amazing, isn't it? How Krishna would take advice from Uddhava and ask for advice. So anyway, Srila Prabhupada there in the purport says, actually Uddhava was never bewildered by these things, but he says they appear bewildering, these contradictions. And the fact is, Prabhupada makes the point that this whole discussion which is happening right now between Krishna and Uddhava is for the benefit of Maitreya, who was sitting nearby. You know, you remember from yesterday that there was discussion about how Maitreya was a jnana bhakta. He wasn't really exactly a pure devotee. There was some influence of impersonalism, perhaps, something like that. But then we were told yesterday that as he's sitting here right now, hearing the discussion between Uddhava and Krishna, his heart changed, his consciousness changed, and he came to a much more elevated level of devotional service, of pure devotional service. And therefore he was, after that, he was able to help Vidura, because otherwise Vidura is already a great devotee and like that. But now Maitreya has become more qualified, so he's able to give Krishna-conscious guidance to someone like Vidura after this association with Lord Krishna in the company of Uddhava. So, anyway, in the past times, Prabhupada explains, the Lord would call for Uddhava for advice. For example, when Jarasandha attacked Mathura, or when the Lord was doing great sacrifices as part of his work as a member of royalty in Dwaraka. So Krishna, of course, nothing is hidden from him. He's omniscient. There's no, in fact, Prabhupada says Krishna has no past, present, or future because he's unaffected by the influence of time. So therefore nothing's hidden from him. He's eternally self-intelligent. So therefore his calling for Uddhava to help him, to enlighten him, is very astonishing. And it appears quite contradictory. But actually when you get into it, you see there's no contradiction. And actually it just makes everything more wonderful and glorious. That out of love for his devotee, he asks for advice, not because he needs it, like if he doesn't get the advice, he's just going to become confused and do some wrong thing or something like that. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, therefore it's better to see them as they are and not attempt to explain them, means the apparent contradictions. Okay, and verse 18. My Lord, please explain to us, if you think us competent to receive it, that transcendental knowledge which gives enlightenment about yourself, and which you explained before to Brahmaji. So, Prabhupada explains, pure devotee like Uddhava has no material afflictions, no material problems, because he's constantly engaged in devotional service. But still, the devotee feels afflicted, feels the situation is problematic when he doesn't have the Lord's association. So therefore, Prabhupada explains, constantly remembering the Lord's activities keeps the devotees alive. So therefore Uddhava asked Lord Krishna to enlighten him with knowledge of Srimad Bhagavatam as he had instructed Brahma. Then verse 19, when I thus, this is Uddhava of course, when I thus expressed my heartfelt desires unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the lotus-eyed Lord instructed me about his transcendental situation. So Srila Prabhupada gives interesting explanation in the purport. He begins that the words paramam stitim, which mean the transcendental situation, if you look in the word for word of the verse, the words paramastitim, the transcendental situation, are significant in this verse. It wasn't the Lord's transcendental situation, paramam stitim, was not actually spoken to Lord Brahma. When the Lord spoke those 4 seed verses, Chatushloki Bhagavatam, to Lord Brahma. So actually, the transcendental situation comprises his dealings with devotees in Dwaraka and Vrindavan. So it's really instruction going on to a higher level, not just what's the relationship between the Lord and the creation, and how's the creation working, and we should try and understand these things, which is what he said to Lord Brahma. But now he's talking about these personal dealings with devotees. It's definitely much more advanced. So Prabhupada makes interesting point that now when the Lord's explaining it to Uddhava, it's intended for Uddhava only. But Maitreya happened to be there, and so it was beneficial to him. And Prabhupada makes the point, bearing in mind that Maitreya was influenced by impersonalism, that these transcendental aspects of the position of the Lord, like his relationships with his devotees, can't be understood by mixed devotees whose devotion is mixed with gyan, meaning impersonal knowledge, mysticism. These activities are, Prabhupada says, the inconceivable pastimes of the Lord, but still it is being revealed to Maitreya. This is a fact, because he happens to be there and he's hearing it all. But it's all part of him being delivered to a higher level of Krishna consciousness. So verse 20, I have studied the path of understanding self-knowledge from my spiritual master, the personality of Godhead, and thus after circumambulating him, I've come to this place, very much aggrieved due to separation. So Prabhupada makes a really nice point at the beginning of the purport, that Uddhava's life is a direct symbol, like a direct manifestation of Chatusloki Bhagavatam as given by Krishna to Lord Brahma. But of course, these 4 verses, Chatusloki Bhagavatam, they're misconstrued by the Mayavadis. So now these speculators are getting clear answers to help them make progress and come to actual Krishna consciousness, or at least give them the opportunity. So Prabhupada goes on in the purport to explain that the verses of Srimad Bhagavatam are just pure theistic science, and they're understandable by people who have graduated from Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, the postgraduate students of Bhagavad Gita. Whereas the speculators generally, of course, they're unauthorized. They're offenders at the feet of the Lord, because they distort the meaning of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, and this way, Prabhupada says, they prepare a direct path to the Tamisra hell. Oh gosh, that's really horrible, extremely horrible. Yeah, they've got no knowledge, and they're condemned life after life, the real impersonalists. They take shelter, interesting point, unnecessarily they take shelter of Shankaracharya. But the thing is, he was not like them. He didn't commit offenses at the feet of Krishna in his commentaries. Particularly, he didn't do a commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam. So Lord Chaitanya, of course, we understand Shankaracharya from Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya said Shankaracharya preached Mayavad to defeat the Buddhist nihilism, which was predominant at that time. But Shankaracharya's intention was not that this Mayavad was to be perpetually accepted. It was just for the emergency situation with the Buddhists dominating the scene. So actually Shankaracharya accepted Krishna as the Supreme Lord in his Bhagavad Gita commentary. And he was a great devotee, so he didn't dare do a commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam, because it would have been an offense at the feet of the Lord. But then later some of his followers, they did. Yes. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread, they say. Oops, okay, now the next paragraph. So these monistic speculators, they've got no business in the Bhagavatam. It's nothing to do with them. And even Vyasadeva forbade people who are engaged in speculation in dharma jnana, dharma, artha, karma, and moksha. He forbade them from entering Srimad Bhagavatam. This is, Prabhupada makes the point, this you find in Bhagavatam 112, Dharma projita kaitavo tra, paramo nimatsaranam satam, that this Bhagavatam is only giving knowledge of the absolute truth, and it's completely rejecting any knowledge or religious activity which is materially motivated, which is what Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha is all about. And Sridhar Swami, great commentator on the Bhagavatam, said the same thing. But anyway, these Mayavadis, they still try to do this. They try to understand Bhagavatam from their impersonal perspective, but all they do is make offenses. So Uddhava, of course, he had studied those 4 verses of the Bhagavatam properly in Krishna consciousness, more confidentially, from the Lord himself. And therefore, paramam sthitim, he could understand that the transcendental situation of the Lord means his relationships with his devotees. So hearing this, Uddhava became overwhelmed by feelings of separation from the Lord. So Prabhupada makes very vital point, unless you come to the stage of Uddhava, you can't understand the 4 verses, seed verses, Chatushloki Bhagavatam, as given by the Lord to Brahma. Yeah. And that coming to that stage of Uddhava means feeling some separation, as was also exhibited by Lord Chaitanya, separation from the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one should not indulge in the unauthorized act of twisting the meaning and thereby putting himself on the dangerous path of offense. Verse 21, my dear Vidura, now I am mad for want of the pleasure of seeing him. And just to mitigate this, I am now proceeding to Badrik Ashram in the Himalayas for association, as I've been instructed by him. Of course, the Lord had instructed him previously, before the great battle at Prabhas. The Lord told him, go to Badrik Ashram, associate with the devotees of Narayan. But Uddhava didn't do it. But now, following that great battle, now he's going to do it. So Prabhupada makes a very interesting point. A pure devotee like Uddhava constantly associates with the Lord in double perception, Prabhupada says. Double perception, double separation and meeting simultaneously. Double perception. Simultaneously being separated, simultaneously meeting the Lord. And the pure devotee is not unengaged in devotional service even for a moment. It's his main occupation. I mean, ultimately, it's his only occupation. So Uddhava's separation from the Lord now was unbearable. So he started for Badrik Ashram, according to the Lord's instruction. because the Lord and the Lord's order are identical. So then Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, as long as one is engaged in the execution of the order of the Lord, there is no factual separation from him. So verse 22, and Uddhava, of course, is continuing. There in Bhadrak Ashram, the personality of Godhead, in his incarnation as the sages Nara and Narayan, has been undergoing great penance since time immemorial for the welfare of all amiable living entities. Right, so Srila Prabhupada comments that Bhadrak Ashram is a great pilgrimage place. It is now, we've been there a few times. It's really quite a place. And even at the time of Uddhava, it was a great pilgrimage place. And even at that time, it was known to be an ancient pilgrimage place. And of course, difficult to reach because it's way up in the Himalayas. Of course, we can use cars. I mean, it is somewhat dangerous, actually, in car, but at least you can get around there. I mean, if there's no special dramas, you can get around pretty efficiently. So, Bhadrak Ashram is one of the 4 dhams, which represent planets of the spiritual world, consisting of the Brahmajyoti and the Vaikunthas. So Prabhupada lists them out. They are Bhadrak Ashram, Rameshwaram, Jagannath Puri, and Dwaraka. And faithful Hindus, at least some of them, still visit all of them sometimes. Okay, so now this brings us on to the 3rd section. Vidura questions Uddhava, who then departs. Right. Vidura questions Uddhava, who then departs, and it's from verse 23 to verse 27. Let us just quickly read through the verses. 23. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, after hearing from Uddhava all about the annihilation of his friends and relatives, the learned Vidura pacified his overwhelming bereavement by dint of his transcendental knowledge. 24. While Uddhava, the chief and most confidential amongst the devotees of the Lord, was going away, Vidura, in affection and confidence, questioned him. Vidura said, O Uddhava, because the servants of Vishnu, the Lord, wander in the interest of serving others, it is quite fit that you kindly describe the self-knowledge with which you have been enlightened by the Lord himself. In other words, Vidura is telling Uddhava, you heard from the Lord, now you must tell me. 26. But, Uddhava's got a different idea. Sri Uddhava said, you may take lessons from the great learned sage Maitreya, who is nearby and who is worshipable for reception of transcendental knowledge. He was directly instructed by the personality of Godhead while he, the Lord, was about to quit this mortal world. So that's an important point, which we've already mentioned to some degree, that Maitreya, he had been an impersonalist, a jnani type of person. But then he was present when the Lord, when Uddhava and the Lord were discussing, and the Lord was instructing Uddhava. So Maitreya then became qualified to give Krishna conscious knowledge to Vidura. Otherwise, if he was just the same somewhat impersonal person that he had been, how could he instruct Vidura in Krishna consciousness? Vidura should instruct him, because Vidura, even though he may not have been absolutely perfect, but he was a very serious devotee, whereas Maitreya had been influenced by Mayavad or just impersonalism. Okay, so let's go through not right now. We'll go on to verse 27. Shukadev Goswami said, O king, after thus discussing with Vidura the transcendental name, fame, qualities, etc., on the bank of the Yamuna, Uddhava was overwhelmed with great affliction. He passed the night as if it were a moment, and thereafter he went away to find Maitreya, actually. Okay, right. So let's go through with the purports. So it's 23 to 27. Vidura questions Uddhava, who then departs. 23. Sri Shukadev Goswami said, after hearing from Uddhava all about the annihilation of his friends and relatives, the learned Vidura pacified his overwhelming bereavement by dint of his transcendental knowledge. So, Prabhupada says that hearing about the Battle of Kurukshetra and how so many of his relatives and friends were destroyed, Prabhupada says, it hurled Vidura into bereavement for the time being. But then, because he's very advanced in transcendental knowledge, through that knowledge he managed to pacify himself. And Prabhupada makes the point that it's an important point that because we've been associated with the material world for a long time, that to bereavement, when there's some loss or some loss of this sort, particularly friends, relatives die, it's not astonishing. But Krishna consciousness means we have to learn to subdue the bereavement by transcendental knowledge. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the talks between Uddhava and Vidura on the topic of Krishna began at sunset, and Vidura was now further advanced in knowledge due to his association with Uddhava. Right, so on to verse 24. While Uddhava, the chief and most confidential amongst the devotees of the Lord, was going away, Vidura, in affection and confidence, questioned him. So the thing was, the point involved in principle was that Vidura was older than Uddhava. So therefore, how could Uddhava take the position of a senior and start instructing him? And Prabhupada explains the bodily relationship. Uddhava was brother of Krishna. Vidura was as old as Krishna's father, Vasudeva. So you see, Vidura is on the level of Krishna's father, Vasudeva. And Uddhava was the brother of Krishna. So therefore, Uddhava is definitely like a whole generation junior to Vidura. But anyway, still Uddhava was more advanced in Krishna consciousness. He's described here as the chief of the devotees. But Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Vidura was confident about this, and thus he addressed Uddhava in that higher category. That is the way of courteous dealings between two devotees. Just see, that's very nice, isn't it? Vidura really felt he can help me. He can instruct me. He's more advanced than me in Krishna consciousness. He can instruct me. And therefore he addressed Uddhava as a senior. Although Uddhava was a junior by a whole generation. And Prabhupada makes a very nice statement. That is the way of courteous dealings between two devotees. So verse 25, Vidura said, O Uddhava, because the servants of Vishnu, the Lord, wander in the interest of serving others, it is quite fit that you kindly describe the self-knowledge with which you have been enlightened by the Lord himself. So in other words, Vidura is trying to say that even though on a certain level you're quite junior to me, but on the transcendental level, you're far more advanced. And you may remember there's a famous pastime from Sri Khanda, which is not far from Mayapur, Navadvip. A devotee, Mukunda, and his son Raghunandan, associates of Lord Chaitanya, and the father, Mukunda, very great devotee. And he's trying to train the son, Raghunandan, how to offer bhoga, how to offer food to the deity. But he finds out after that when the son Raghunandan is offering food to the deity in the altar, that Raghunandan was insisting that the deity come and actually eat. And the deity did that. And Mukunda understood, the deity never did that for me. So therefore, my son Raghunandan is actually more advanced. I mean, this is just really abbreviating the story, but in Chaitanya Charitamrita it describes how the two of them went to visit Lord Chaitanya in Jagannath Puri. And Lord Chaitanya looked at them, Mukunda the father, Raghunandan the son. Lord Chaitanya looked at them and then asked a very strange question. I mean, on the surface of it, he asked, which one of you is the father and which one of you is the son? And Mukunda, it's obvious Mukunda's the father, he's probably 30 years older. But understanding in terms of the spiritual advancement of Raghunandan and how the deity came and sat down and ate from his hand, Mukunda said, actually, I think that Raghunandan is the father and I am the son. And Lord Chaitanya agreed and said, yes, that's right. He who awakens your Krishna consciousness is your father spiritually. So Vidura has the same attitude, that you've heard from the Lord, you're much more advanced than me. So please tell me what the Lord told you. So anyway, in the purport, Prabhupada explains that the devotees, the servants of the Lord, they serve all of society, not just, but by giving transcendental knowledge about relationship with the Lord, activities in that relationship, what's the goal of life. that knowledge can help people, but bodily knowledge, I mean, it can help. Like if you're sick, you get some knowledge how to cure your sickness. So that's something, but it's all temporary. Bodily knowledge is all temporary, so it's not the same as transcendental knowledge. So ultimately, Prabhupada explains, we have to revive our self-knowledge, who we are, in fact. Otherwise, if we don't, our human lives will be baffled. Therefore, great devotees wander all over, like Narada Muni, and even to other planets. So Uddhava received this knowledge directly from the Lord, and it has to be distributed, especially to people like Vidura, because Vidura was advanced, highly advanced in the devotional service of the Lord. So particularly advanced devotees should get this knowledge more and more from the Lord. But everyone should, actually. So then the second paragraph, Prabhupada explains, of course, very important, famous point, real transcendental knowledge comes in parampara, disciplic succession. In this case, from the Lord to Uddhava, from Uddhava to Vidura, and then Vidura could take that knowledge and distribute it. At least that was the idea. Although Vidura Uddhava didn't really agree to really, to get into it. And you can't achieve real transcendental knowledge by speculation, as the impersonal, mundane wranglers try to do. So Vidura wanted to know from Uddhava knowledge of what was just mentioned before, paramam stitim, the supreme situation, transcendental situation. Prabhupada says, in which the Lord is known by his transcendental pastimes. So Vidura was older than Uddhava, but wanted to become a servant of Uddhava. That's nice. Anyway, this formula of disciplic succession was taught by Lord Chaitanya also. You have to receive the knowledge from, it doesn't matter who, a Brahmin or even a Sudra or less. Doesn't matter so much, provided the person is actually conversant with the science of the Lord. In other words, the person is, Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, a person who knows the science of Krishna is factually a bona fide spiritual master. So on to verse 26, Sri Uddhava said, you may take lessons from the great learned sage Maitreya, who is nearby and who is worshipable for reception of transcendental knowledge. He was directly instructed by the personality of Godhead while he, the Lord, was about to quit this mortal world. So Prabhupada goes into this point, the concern of Uddhava. What Uddhava was concerned about, that even if you're very well versed in the transcendental science, but you have to be careful of maryada vyatikrama, impertinently surpassing greater persons, or a greater person. Yes. And if you do that, oh my gosh, you'll lose your duration of life, your opulence, your piety, whatever blessings you've received from the world. You'll lose it all. So in order to become really well versed of the science, necessitates being aware of the techniques of transcendental science, and this is one of those important techniques. Don't instruct someone when a senior is on hand who could instruct that person. Yeah. So therefore, Uddhava, being aware of these things, he advised Vidura to approach Maitreya. Even though Prabhupada explains, we already discussed a bit, Vidura wanted to accept Uddhava, but Vidura was as old as Uddhava's father. So in the presence of Maitreya, Uddhava couldn't accept him, couldn't instruct him. So the rule is, Prabhupada says, the rule is that in the presence of a higher personality, one should not be very eager to impart instructions, even if one is competent and well-versed. This is very important. This is what we got to learn from these few verses here. So Uddhava made that decision on the basis that Maitreya had been instructed by the Lord, as the Lord was preparing to leave and go back to Godhead. So in other words, one should not be anxious. One should not be eager to become a spiritual master for profit and fame, only for service to the Lord. And we must know, the Lord never tolerates Maryada Vyatikrama, trying to instruct a person when a senior is present who could do the instructing. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one should never pass over the honor due to an elderly spiritual master in the interests of one's own personal gain and fame. Impertinence on the part of the pseudo-spiritual master is very risky to progressive spiritual realization. And then verse 27, Shukadev Goswami said, O king, after thus discussing with Vidura the transcendental name, fame, qualities, etc., on the bank of the Yamuna, Uddhava was overwhelmed with great affliction. He passed the night as if it were a moment, and thereafter he went away, off to Bhadragashram for the association of the advanced devotees there and Nara and Narayan. So, okay, there's a short purport here that the word used for Krishna here is Vishva Murti, means the universal person. Vishva meaning the universe and Murti meaning the form or the person. So both Uddhava and Maitreya were greatly afflicted because of Krishna's departure. Both Uddhava and Maitreya. Both Uddhava and Vidura. So both Uddhava and Vidura were greatly afflicted because of Krishna's departure. And the more they discussed about him, the more the picture of the Lord became visible everywhere. So Prabhupada makes the point that such visualization of the Lord is neither false nor imaginary, but it's factual, absolute truth. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, when the Lord is perceived as Vishvamurti, it is not that he loses his personality or transcendental eternal form, but he becomes visible in the same form everywhere. That's the point. Vishvamurti, the universal person. It's not that he loses his personality or his eternal spiritual form, but he becomes visible in that form everywhere. So, okay, we go on now to the next section, which is from verse 28 to verse 34, which doesn't quite actually finish the chapter, but it's getting pretty close. So, okay. So this section, fourth section, Krishna instructs Uddhava before departing, verse 28 to verse 34. Let us read through the verses. The king inquired, at the end of the pastimes of the Lord of the three worlds, Sri Krishna, and after the disappearance of the members of the Vrishni and Bhoja dynasties, who were the best of the great commanders, why did Uddhava alone remain? So this is Parikshit. The king is inquiring. Yes, why did Uddhava? Everybody else is gone. Why did Uddhava remain? Verse 29, Shukadev Goswami replied, my dear king, the cursing of the Brahmins was only a plea, but the actual fact was the supreme desire of the Lord. He wanted to disappear from the face of the earth after dispatching his excessively numerous family members. He thought to himself as follows. Okay, that's now verse 30. Here we are. The Lord is now thinking to himself, now I shall leave the vision of this mundane world, and I see that Uddhava, the foremost of my devotees, is the only one who can be directly entrusted with knowledge about me. You know, ultimately what this is going to be is the Uddhava Gita. Here now it's all very abbreviated, but in the 11th canto, we'll see when we get there, after some time, that there's the whole Uddhava Gita, many chapters, I forget how many it might be, 15 or more, and it's Krishna instructing Uddhava at this very time here. But what we're reading about here is just a very abbreviated form of that. So verse 31, and this is Krishna now, thinking to himself what to do. Who's he going to give the final instructions to? He's going to give them to Uddhava. So Krishna thinks, Uddhava is not inferior to me in any way, because he's never affected by the modes of material nature. Therefore he may remain in this world in order to disseminate specific knowledge of the personality of Godhead. Verse 32, Shukadev Goswami informed the king that Uddhava, being thus instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all Vedic knowledge and the spiritual master of the three worlds, Uddhava reached the pilgrimage site of Badrik Ashram and engaged himself there in trance to satisfy the Lord. Verse 33, Vidura also heard from Uddhava about the appearance and disappearance of Lord Krishna, the Supersoul, in the mortal world, which is a subject matter sought after with great perseverance by the great sages. Okay, 33 and 34, last verse in this section. The Lord's glorious acts and his acceptance of various transcendental forms for the performance of extraordinary pastimes in the mortal world are very difficult for anyone other than his devotees to understand. And for the beasts, they are simply a mental disturbance. All right, so let's go through. It's the fourth section, from verse 28 to verse 34, and it's Krishna instructing Uddhava just before departing. So verse 28, the king inquired, at the end of the pastimes of the Lord of the three worlds, Sri Krishna, and after the disappearance of the members of the Vrishni and Bhoja dynasties, who were the best of the great commanders, why did Uddhava alone remain? Well, that of course is being answered as we read, because Krishna felt he was the right one to get the final instructions and then disseminate the final instructions that the Lord gave. So anyway, in the purport, Prabhupada refers to Srila Jiva Goswami, who says that Nidhanam, the first word of the verse, Nidhanam, means the transcendental abode of the Lord. Ni means the highest. Yes. Ni means the highest, and Dhanam means opulence. So, therefore, because the Lord's abode is the highest manifestation of transcendental opulence, it can be called Nidhanam. The purpose of the word, the purpose of using the word Nidhanam, Prabhupada explains, apart from some grammatical elucidation, the real purpose is to indicate that all the members of the Vrishni and Bhoja dynasties were associates of the Lord. And after the end of the Lord's pastimes, they were all sent to their respective positions in the transcendental abode. Second paragraph. Prabhupada explains, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur talks of akritim in the last line of the verse. Akritim means pastimes. Means complete, and kritim means transcendental pastimes. So, since the Lord is identical with his transcendental body, there's no question of him changing his body. But to act in accordance with the rules and the customs of the material world, he seems to take birth or leave his body. But pure devotees know the actual fact. So therefore, serious students of Srimad Bhagavatam have to follow the notes and comments of great acharyas like Srila Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, right? To others, to non-devotees, it may seem that these acharyas are doing grammatical jugglery, but to the students in disciplic succession, the explanations of the great acharyas are all quite fit. And the third paragraph of the purport of verse 28. So from the first line, the word upagateshu is also significant. Upagateshu, which means, upagateshu, having overtaken, from the word for word. Right. So all the Vrishnis and Bhojas reach the abode of the Lord. Other devotees don't go there directly, but those who are associates of the Lord, the pure associates of the Lord, have no attraction for the opulences of this world, of any planet in this world. Sometimes, but Prabhupada makes the point, and it's a very interesting point, sometimes because of inquisitiveness, the devotees they're meant to be promoted to the Lord's abode, they may have some attraction for the opulence of higher planets. And they want to see them, and thus they desire to see them while they're going up to perfection, while going up to the kingdom of God. But the Vrishnis and Bhojas had no such attractions, so they just went straight to the Lord's abode. And we can mention that when Jayananda Prabhu, the famous disciple of Prabhupada, Rathayatra man, he passed away just, some couple of months or something like that before Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said about him, there's a letter Prabhupada wrote to him after the departure of Jayananda, a letter to Jayananda, in which Srila Prabhupada says, you have gone back to Godhead, but if you had some attractions for some material things, then you may stop in the heavenly planets for a little while and then go on back to Godhead. So, therefore, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also suggests that according to the Amarakosha dictionary, akriti may also mean signal. Yes. Otherwise, it was referred to in the second paragraph, just right here, of the purport of this verse, that akritim means pastimes, but here Prabhupada mentions that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur suggests that akriti also can mean signal. And therefore Krishna ordered Uddhava by signal to go to Badrik Ashram after his departure, the Lord's departure. And Uddhava, as a pure devotee, he did that more faithfully than going back to Godhead. He's in such a position, he can just go back to Godhead. But he got the special instruction from the Lord, go to Badrik Ashram. So he executed that instruction, Prabhupada says, more faithfully than going back to Godhead or going to the abode of the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, that was the cause of his remaining alone, even after the departure of the Lord from the face of the earth. And of course it's going to be discussed further in the next couple of few verses, but we'll go through all of that tomorrow. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.